Are we supposed to be broadcasting yet? Do we broadcast yet?
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is well. My name is Terence McNamee. I am a global fellow of the Wilson Center attached to the Africa program. And I'm speaking today from Johannesburg in South Africa. It's a really great pleasure to be with you here today. Our panel, as all of you know, is entitled Digitizing Africa's Economies and E-commerce as a Pathway Towards Africa's Development. Now, we've had to run a bit of an audible. Originally, we had 4 panelists, but at the moment, we only have 3. I hope that our 4th panelist is able to join us at some point. But I'm really honored to be moderating this session on an incredibly important topic. We have panelists who are representing different parts of the continent, and also, if our 4th speaker joins us, representing different viewpoints and perspectives, and that is of government and also the private sector. And that is really important because, as we know, in all sectors and in all spheres, but particularly the digital space, it is so important for government and business to act more effectively and collaboratively together, because without doing that, there's simply no chance for Africa's digital potential to be realized. Like all of you, I'm really looking forward over the next hour to hear some concrete and implementable ways that we can accelerate Africa's development through digital transformation. And I'm also looking forward in particular to reflections from our panelists on the role of young people in driving Africa's digital transformation. As any parent knows, the speed at which our kids are understanding and applying digital technology, the pace of that is truly extraordinary. And our children deserve the same kind of enabling environment that we find in other parts of the world to fully realize their digital potential. And in doing so, that would be of huge benefit to the African continent. Before turning the floor over to our first panelist, can I just remind our speakers that our timings are tight. We have only 6 minutes to get your main points across. And, you know, in digitization, we can use a lot of pretty complicated tech jargon. We know digitization is a very complicated subject, but that doesn't mean that we can't use simple language to explain it. So we'll try and keep the tech jargon to a minimum. Our first speaker today was going to be the government minister from Togo, Minister Lawson. We hope she will be able to join us because she has a very important role in that country's digital transformation, and she has a very important perspective speaking from government. But instead, we're going to, like all good online conferences, we're going to be agile, and we're going to change the order. And so my first speaker today is not going to be Minister Lawson. It is going to be Mrs. Ntim. And it's a real great privilege to welcome her. She has extraordinary experience in terms of this, this space. She's an award-winning expert in the world of startups and creating ecosystems for startups, particularly in emerging economies. She has a fascinating background, part Haitian American, part Ghanaian descent. And she's going to begin by giving the entrepreneurial perspective in terms of how we can accelerate Africa's digital transformation. So on that note, Christine, over to you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and hello and welcome everyone to this amazing platform. I'm definitely excited to be a part of this conversation, especially considering that we're celebrating 10 years of the YALI program, and there's 10 more years, if not 100 more years to go. We always look at it from a century perspective. So as shared before, my name is Christine and Tim. I'm the founder and CEO of the Global Startup Ecosystem. And we're essentially a tech recruitment company that's home to the world's first digital accelerator program for emerging markets. So we have been running digital programs, especially in emerging markets across the African continent and the Caribbean for years. And as of last year, I think the world has truly embraced the reality of being digital first, right? It's unfortunate that it took a pandemic for us to understand the power of digital economies and the power of having digital platforms to empower our entrepreneurial sector, our workforce sector. But now I think it's very clear. So the conversation is not, should we be digital first, but how do we become digital first, especially when it comes to the emerging excitement around Africa, African youth. There are countries in Africa where close to 70% of the population is under 35. That is a huge opportunity for investors, enablers, and stakeholders across the African continent. And so we work alongside a lot of stakeholders to help them understand African markets, where there's potential to really digitize the economies and the platforms and industries, but also how do we create programs and initiatives that actually drives this digitization that's happening over the next couple of years. So I'll start by saying that the most immediate thing that is important for governments, but stakeholders to understand is that governments needs to really embrace a digital first mentality. We have worked with over probably 60 different governments, ministries of tourism, Ministry of Information, Ministry of Communications. We've worked with different government sectors. And one thing that we realize is that there is usually first either a ministry dedicated to digital initiatives, a committee dedicated to digital initiatives, or at least an initiative, a program that's backed by the government to showcase their pretty much their focus on digital first. So that's the first thing. The second, I would say, is a long-term program. One thing that we are doing with several governments across the African continent, including Ghana, where I'm currently speaking to you all from today. I'm in here in Accra, Ghana, speaking to all of you. It's really talking about a 10-year, if not plus digital program. Some of our government partners are doing 10-year programs where they're launching national service programs that are digital first. Many of you are probably aware of national service programs in Nigeria, in Ghana, Ethiopia, and other African governments. And I know there's pros and cons to these national service programs, but there's been a revamp of digitizing these programs and creating opportunities for local young people to find access to jobs. We all know the unemployment rate across the African continent is at an all-time high, and there's more and more graduates entering the workforce not having access to jobs. So we at GSE, we have partnered with governments to help them digitize the national career service programs to prepare youth for pretty much the future of jobs and the future of entrepreneurship on a digital spectrum. So that's very, very critical. And the last thing I would say is really looking around how do we create a multi-year initiative and not looking at starting initiatives government to government. Usually governments are around 4 to 5 years, and then once a new government comes into power, initiatives are dismantled and we start the wheel again. Really looking at even like countries like Dubai, where they say like, we should have a 10-year, 20-year, 15-year roadmap, looking at the sustainable development goals and seeing like what is a multi-year initiative that we could follow to get from today to 2030 to really driving initiatives beyond government timeframes when it comes to putting digital first initiatives on the roadmap. So I'll end by saying that we have seen so much energy in terms of the young innovative sector, where young people like myself, I am under the age of 35. I am creating solutions that impact people of my background. Of course, you hear my American accent. I have a Haitian background. My husband is Ghanaian. So you're seeing a collision of diaspora and young people across the African continent working together to create solutions for young people by young people. So that's something that I think is very crucial. And lastly, really digitizing or launching national career service programs that are digital first, that's preparing young people for the future skills that we need to really empower our industries. Africa is moving very, very rapidly. Investments in the continent is at an all-time high. So we need to have national service programs that's preparing young people for those opportunities. And that is really motivating them to really think ahead in terms of their career. So hopefully I could connect with anyone via this platform. Again, the Global Startup Ecosystem, GSC, you could Google us. You could find that we've worked with, again, dozens of governments across the African continent on these initiatives, but more importantly, embracing that the digital future is here, and to jump on that roadmap, jump on that path and make it happen. And like I said, you could hear my energy. We're here to make it happen, and we are very, very passionate about this. And I'm so excited that, in celebrating 10 years of YALI, that this is a pertinent conversation as part of a leading conversation for this program as to how we digitize Africa and empower our young people to be at the forefront of any initiative or solution that makes Africa digital first. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Christine, and thanks for making your old Asian moderator feel bad when you mentioned you're still under 35 years of age, but incredible accomplishments for a young age. No, that was great, and thanks so much for keeping to time. I mean, one of the things that I hope we get onto, I was just reading in an article yesterday that over 300 million Africans live more than 50 kilometers from a fiber or a broad-based connection, a broadband connection. And so obviously that's a massive challenge when we think about digital transformation, but maybe that digital infrastructure gap we'll get onto a little bit later. So thanks again, Christine. I'm now going to turn to Viola. And Viola also, and I should have mentioned this earlier with Christine, is that I'm introducing our speakers, but they have very long and illustrious CVs. And if you want more details about their background, please consult the Summit website. But just short and sharp for Viola, she's another award-winning innovator and an entrepreneur. She oversees strategy and business development and innovation for Ovamba Solutions, which she co-founded, and maybe she'll say a word about it here. So Viola, I know you divide your time from the US and Africa. I'm not sure where you are right now, but welcome, and over to you. I think we have to unmute you.
You know what they say about old people and technology, right? So it's a pleasure to be here. Everybody out there, this YALI event is pivotal. I'm going to say a few things that are more important than what I've done. This is an opportunity for us to tell you how not to mess it up. Don't screw up the future. The future belongs to the youth. In fact, I think the thing I'm most proud of, other than having founded Ovamba Solutions, which is a trade tech innovator for emerging markets, is the fact that I actually have succeeded in teaching young Africans how to disobey their parents and authority with responsibility, because that is what you are here to do. I would say that the thing I'm most excited about this event has nothing to do with what I've done, as I mentioned, but to provide for you as the ideas that will incentivize you to leverage the digital economy and what that means. Made a few notes, Terence, while Christine was speaking, because it was highly exciting and very, just very impassioned. But we are focused on driving the digital African economy and using e-commerce as a pathway, because the time has come for Africans to be able to create transferable wealth. And in the fourth industrial revolution, it's all things digital and technical. When I was quote unquote young, we were considered technically skilled if we knew how to program a VC machine. Today, we have young people. I have grandchildren, by the way, 4-year-olds that can get online and figure out exactly what they need to do. It's almost as if the neural pathways, especially for Africans, have leapt from thinking about it to being able to do things very, very quickly. And in that, we have two opportunities that I know this conference is going to cover: how to use the digital economy and the e-commerce opportunities to build wealth for yourselves, but also how to make sure that the digital gap is closed so that we do not have digital poverty in the future. Africans have often been the victims of so-called poverty, but the global world doesn't realize that we are the richest when it comes to our youth. Love the things that you said, Christine. For me, I have reached a point where talking about what we've done is irrelevant compared to the following. We had the slave trade triangle 400 years ago. That triangle now exists in digital form for all of us to create wealth, connecting Africa, the Caribbean, and African Americans and the diaspora via digital networks that leverage capital, goods, trade, e-commerce, and banking is where our future will reside. It's a future I'm not going to see. But I and others are responsible for its foundation, and that happens with all of the graduates of the YALI program. So I'm excited to be here. Yes, I've won awards. Yes, it was groovy. Yes, I do believe that Islamic finance and trade is the new economy, and Africans have great access to that. I'm going to concede my minutes because I'm so glad that Honorable Lawson has been able to join us, and the rest of this conference is going to be absolutely excellent. Terence, I hope that's okay with you.
Viola, that is more than okay. I mean, I'm enjoying this session so much. I mean, you guys have set such a high standard. This is going to be a great Q&A, I have a sense. So as Viola said, I'm absolutely delighted, but I'm not going to go to you yet, Minister. I'll give you a little bit more of a 6-minute break to gather your thoughts, but it's so good to see you on the screen. I'm going to instead go to Torai. And Torai, and apologies for the last name, I hope I get this right, Chinya Makovu, who hails from Zimbabwe, and he's the director of Flow Cash, which is one of the largest digital payment platforms in Africa. I don't think I can resist asking you how you think Bitcoin is going to do generally and in Africa, but I'll let you speak as you wish. But Torai, over to you.
Thanks, Terence. It's a pleasure, and I'm actually particularly glad that we have a good representation of women on the panel. We need those voices. We need them to echo in our conversations, especially when we talk about e-commerce and digitalization on the continent. So greetings to all organizers and attendees of this summit. Happy YALI anniversary. And bravo to everyone who is working smart to ensure that digitization becomes everyone's reality on the continent. And at this point, I would like to steal Neil Armstrong's phrasing and say, what you guys work on a daily basis is one small step for you, but a giant leap for Africa. Digitization is something that is pretty close to my heart. It is precisely why we built Flowcash into a Pan-African payments platform that helps some of the largest entities on the continent to handle digital payments across the continent and also in the Middle East. Just to give you a picture, most of the airlines on the African continent use Flowcash payment systems for their processing of tickets. So when you travel and you are buying something online, you're probably going through our platform to settle whichever service provider you're working with. Digitization is the single most important game changer for the African continent, as it provides a chance for us to catch up with everybody. So there are a lot of front runners and we are behind, so we need to quickly move and catch up using technology. It presents a unique opportunity to stimulate economic growth and industrialization, fight poverty and improve people's lives. It has the potential to change many facets of life, from all aspects of how we interact, such as mobility, health, including managing pandemics, agriculture, e-commerce, education, and financial services, just to name a few. And us as Flowcash, we are in the financial services space and e-commerce space. So we are making a small impact, but there's a huge space that digital services or digitization can bring influence to everyone on the continent. Most importantly, digital transformation provides a technological window of opportunity to build greater integration and interconnection of African markets. So the more we have opportunity to trade with each other, the broader the scope and range of economic growth we provide ourselves. Add to this the convenience and access fintech unlocks for marginalized communities, either to not covered by traditional financial services, which is something that Viola actually alluded to. Then we have a good recipe for increased continental trade that includes millions of our people. This is where e-commerce comes in. And the African Continental Free Trade Area presents more opportunities for players on the continent. So with the current framework now that's being implemented, I am able to trade easily with everybody on the continent. And that's where we need digitalization to kick in. We certainly cannot reap opportunities digitization brings without building capacity to explore them. So developing digital literacy and skills, including investing in comprehensive STEM programs, becomes very key. Therein lies the opportunity for the private sector and governments. However, a digital economy presents opportunities and risks too. Skills development is important to ensure that we guard ourselves against online risks as well as cybersecurity challenges that come with it. Lastly, fostering digitalization for growth and entrepreneurship helps to feed into job creation and private sector empowerment, particularly digital startups, small to medium enterprises, and innovative community initiatives that leverage digital technologies to provide support. Friends alluded to digital currencies. It's one of the very interesting points that I have on here. I've been involved in digital currencies early on in Africa, right from 2011 when they started. And I was the chairperson of one of the earliest cryptocurrency exchanges in Zimbabwe, which was the earliest on the continent. And I think Bitcoin is going to do very well. The future is very bright for Bitcoin. But more importantly, in the context of this conversation, I used to say 5 years ago, digital currencies present the best opportunity for Africa to sit and have a conversation on the global table. And unfortunately, our governments have missed the opportunity to see this technological window of opportunity. However, I still think that if we're going to embrace a FCTA and we're going to embrace blockchain and digital currency innovations, it is very easy for us to have e-commerce. So once we have that, we have a very good platform to trade across the continent. And this is an interesting note for the minister. In the context of the AFCTA and digital currencies, one of the most interesting, ridiculous scenarios in Africa that I've ever encountered is if I want to travel to Togo, I have to go through France or fly to Europe and then go to Togo. It's the same thing that actually happens when you transact on the African continent. So I'm in Zimbabwe and I want to transact with someone in Botswana. I have to go through New York to do a transaction. And that's extremely ridiculous and there's a lot of friction. So digital currencies, speaking to the question that Terence brought on, can resolve this friction and enable trade across the continent without us having to hop from one continent to another before we execute a single e-commerce transaction.
Thank you very much, Torai. I think there's a certain poetry in that one of the continent's greatest experts on cryptocurrency should come from Zimbabwe, given that not more than 10 or 11 years ago, we were holding $50 trillion bills we couldn't really buy a piece of bread with. But that's so insightful. Thank you so much. And let me now turn to our last panelist. What an absolute delight that Minister Lawson has been able to join us. As has been mentioned, she is a minister in Togo in West Africa, and she is the Minister of Digital Economy and Digital Transformation. And she is going to give us a government perspective. And as I mentioned earlier, this could not be more important because unlike mobile telephony, when it expanded in the African continent and didn't really need government that much, for the next stages of our digital transformation, government and business really have to be on the same hymn sheet. So Minister, I'm going to hand it over to you, and thanks for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? Okay, hello, everyone. It's an absolute honor and a pleasure to be here today. I was able to listen to a few of your comments, and I'm going to give you the perspective of the West African government. I don't pretend to be speaking on behalf of all of Africa. The first thing we need to do from our perspective in Togo is to build infrastructure. We talk about all these issues, crypto, all these opportunities, but first we need to have decent infrastructure, internet infrastructure. And so in Togo, in order to do so, we rely upon mobile players a lot. We want to have 4G everywhere. By next year, mid of next year, we will have 4G every year. I'm very proud of it to tell you that we are the first West African country to have launched 5G. It's still experimental. It's not something that is super widespread, I have to admit, but it's good in terms of innovation. But I have to also tell you that for me, mobile is not the end game. I want to make sure that people have FTTH, fiber to the home. And it's very important because I'm talking to young people, and most of young people have to live wherever they live outside of the capital city to go to the capital city because they want to have access to decent internet connection. And so what we need to do is to make sure that when we talk about digital transformation, it's not because it's hype, it's because this is the basic of all development. This is the basis for inclusion. And I'm not talking about financial inclusion. I'm talking about including people in the country. You can be part of a country and really not belong in the country because everything that happens has nothing to do with you, you see? And there is no opportunity that is offered to you and you're not relevant. So from our perspective, we want to make sure that every household gets very high-speed internet. And we decided to do so by deploying fiber on electrical networks. So our objective is by 2025, we want to connect 300,000 households to very high-speed internet. Today, we have only 40,000 households. And not only households, but our commitment is that we want to make sure that all the schools in the country are also connected to very high-speed internet, So that's number one. Number two, it's not about deploying infrastructure, it's about the services that you can have access to because you have very decent infrastructure. And I'm talking about, and the way we want to do it, we're talking about AFCFTA. We need to give digital ID to all Togolese. Why digital ID? Because it's the foundation for payment systems. It's the foundation for every other applications that we will develop as a country. I say we because it could be from the government, it could be from the private sector. Starting September this year, we are going to deploy biometric ID. We've received financing through the World Bank to deploy and to give digital ID to all the citizens and a unique numbering. And this is going to serve as a basis to change all forms within the administration. When you talk about e-government, you're talking about enabling people to fill forms online. We want to use the fact that we're going to give IDs to all our citizens to change all the forms within the administration and to enable digital forms. And I also want to say a few other words about the commitment we have payment. And there is one experience that we had last year. We were fighting and we're still fighting this pandemic, and we deployed a platform to distribute cash directly to the most vulnerable people. And this is a note to Ray. It's not about crypto, but it was that we wanted to make sure that we would distribute cash and people would receive it directly. So we built this platform And from onboarding, people would register to the platform and they would receive, within 2 seconds, they would receive payment that was equal to 1/3 of the minimum wage. And we did that to support the most vulnerable people. But we use mobile payment platform for social protection. And that was very powerful because, you know, Togo has 7.5 million inhabitants. We had 1.6 million people registering to the platform, and 820,000 people became beneficiaries and were able to receive their payment straight away. So this is really defining for us because it shows us that we want to make sure that most of government to citizens payment are digitized from now on. And this is going to also help a lot in terms of transparency, because when you digitize platform, you have a high level of traceability, and that's what is really important these days. Not only traceability, but also effectiveness, because we were able to deliver this cash in no time. And but it's not about the government, you know, it's about creating a framework that enables all this digital transformation. And in order to do so, we took lots of laws. We are one of the first country to have taken data protection laws. We took cybersecurity laws, and we created agencies that would be able to enforce, you know, these new regulations. But it's also a private sector. And so one philosophy of ours is to include as much as possible the private sector in everything we do. And so we've been creating these companies in public-private partnerships. For example, we have a cybersecurity company that we created with a Polish IT firm, and it's state-owned and private sector-owned. And the reason for that is that we understand that when we talk about digital transformation, it's really about services. And most of the time, and I'm sure you're going to appreciate that because you come from the private sector, we think that the private sector knows better than us, the public sector, how to deliver great services. And so for that reason, it's extremely important to include them in the most important projects that we're doing. And the last thing I want to say is that talking about a framework and having all these young people listening to us, digital transformation cannot happen without making sure that most of the innovation is driven by future generations, which are the young people. And this right now we face few challenges. One has to do with education. You know, we need to make sure, and that's why when I was talking about building great infrastructure, I said our commitment is to deploy a very high-speed internet in schools and build these platforms. And we're actually working with other countries to build an education and digital literacy platform. I think I have to stop there because Terence is showing that I'm talking too much. So pretty much, I'll answer questions.
No, Minister, I could have listened to you go on the whole time. My problem is on my right side, I've got all of these questions that are now coming in from our participants, and I know our time is limited, but thank you so much again for joining us. We know you must be incredibly busy. So listen, let's just start on the questions because we've got a lot that are coming in, and I'm going to start. I'm going to go back to cryptocurrencies, and I'm a little bit mad, Torai. Maybe we'll take it offline and you can allow me to speculate on Bitcoin there. But the question from Olubola is, when will digital currencies be regularized and generally accepted in Africa? So I'm going to point that question to Zimbabwe.
Sorry for that. Let me start by making a quick distinction between digital currencies and cryptocurrencies. So your ordinary fiat currencies could also be digitized, and then cryptocurrencies will certainly use cryptographic science, encryption mechanisms to make sure that they're secure. So I think the biggest challenge on the African continent right now is that the innovation in the digital currency space is way ahead of governments and their frameworks. So speaking to our experiences, we set up a cryptocurrency exchange in Zimbabwe in 2015, and there was no framework, so there was no regulation. So our approach at the time was, if there's no regulation, then we might as well just do it. And at that time, we were fortunate because the government said, "Oh, go ahead and do it, and we'll learn from you." So, but you don't have governments across the continent having the same attitude. So, for example, countries like Namibia, Zambia would be very strict with regards to that. So, as and when they will be regularized is a question that is applicable to on a country by country basis. But I think for young people, what I can encourage them is to learn and figure out and play around with the technology and learn how it works. Perhaps at some point they'll be able to figure out solutions that are actually helpful for continents. Coming to the issue of a government, my theory that I'm building right now, I'm actually writing a white paper to address that specific issue for the continent. The complexity of doing trade on the African continent, which is why Africa to Africa trade is very limited, I think just under 15%, is because if I export anything to Rwanda or Kenya, I have to make payments via a bank in New York, and then it's going to take 4 days for that to clear over the SWIFT system and so on and so forth. Whereas if you were on a digital platform, whether it's cryptographically managed or not, you could settle this in 10 seconds. And then the logistics elements in the supply chain will kick in. We could work this out using institutions that already exist, like Afreximbank or AFDB and so forth. But we actually need a pan-African digital currency that helps to settle transactions. So I don't have to worry about currencies, what we uses, right? We can always just sweep a transaction using the digital mechanisms.
Thanks so much, Torai. Let me just move on to the next question. And I'm going to start this one with you, Christine, which I think is incredibly important. It goes to what I was saying earlier about inclusivity. This is from Hamadou. How can we include vulnerable people more in the digital transformation of Africa? Disabled people, rural people, disadvantaged people, even illiterate people. This is a real issue of inclusivity because we don't want to create another kind of sort of digital apartheid in Africa. So Christine, you want to have a shot at that one?
Yes, it's an important question. I think when it comes to inclusivity, like we have to really look at what platforms are already in place and how do we amplify the reach. One thing that I've seen many times that stop people from really innovating in Africa is that we don't have infrastructure. We don't have this X to Z. I do understand Africa doesn't have a lot of, essential elements that really can make and break digital transformation, but Africa does have everything. It's just not evenly distributed. And I think that's a key narrative that we need to take part in because I think there's a big misconception that Africa is missing a lot of different parts. I've seen this many with diaspora coming into African nations. Oh, we don't have X, but we do have it. It's just not evenly distributed. So I think first we need to start with the narrative of what Africa has and how do we make it more accessible. Second, once we get past framing the narrative correctly of what Africa has and how do we make it inclusive, then we need to tackle how do we actually make it accessible to certain people. A perfect example, as stated before, we're hugely a big proponent that governments either need to digitize the National Career Service programs to empower the next generation of youth for jobs of the future, or create digital career service programs to prepare people for opportunities. What that means is a lot of people say, well, they don't have access in rural the internet to be able to take part. That is not true. As stated before, my accent is American, but I grew up in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. You want to talk about Wi-Fi connectivity not evenly distributed? Go to Haiti, go to Port-au-Prince, go to the outskirts of the Caribbean country. You will see that there's an issue. Then what we've done in terms of solutions is we started the program in the capital and we partnered with telecoms company to provide Wi-Fi hotspots for the participants who don't have access to Wi-Fi capabilities within their home villages. So that way, once or twice a year, the program is taking place where we specifically target those rural populations until there's so much demand that telecom companies have to go to those rural areas because it's a high demand. And that leads me to my third component to answer that question is we do need to start and work from there. Because a lot of times, because we don't see quote unquote demand, we don't create the infrastructure that's needed in these rural areas, in these pockets of experiences where people say there's no infrastructure to really start doing capacities in those areas. That is not true. Once you start, you'll see the demand grow. So I'll end by saying that, you know, we really need to rethink again around the narrative, around what Africa has and how do we build on what's already there. Second, really think about creative solutions to make digital first in places that are not assessing these platforms. Again, I've showcased a case study in what we've done in Haiti. We also did the same case study in Nigeria, by the way, last year with the Nigerian government, with local embassies and with local partners to scale that. And finally, it's very, very important when it comes to digital first. We're not just talking about just coming on the internet. We're talking about mindset, right? I'm a mother of 3 kids, and I will tell you right now, my toddler knows more about how to access the internet than I've done, you know, just, you know, as a tech enabler. So we need to think about digital first being the mindset. I think, you know, Honorable Minister, you said a beautiful thing about digital ideas. And a lot of people think about, you know, just fintech, but what present access to land rights. We have a huge issue where we can't access certain land rights across the continent. So really thinking creatively about what does digital first mean for your country and then applying it, because sometimes digital first is different for different African governments. And when coming from the perspective of young people, again, this is the YALI Conference 10. We need to go back to young people. Young people have the energy and the talent to build these solutions. We need to go back to enabling them, because they probably have more solutions than you think of in making these opportunities available for the masses across the African continent.
Thanks, Christine. I'm having difficulty keeping everyone to short answers because the answers are so inspiring. It's really great. Viola, did you want to get in on there?
Absolutely, and I will be I'm known for being specific. Minister, we have a problem with Francophone Africa. It wrecks the lives of young people. There is no African nation that survives the French government's policies, and that means a lot for young people. Before we even get to talking about digitization, the route by which people even come to the planet is challenging. We don't have land records. Birth certificates are not correct. If we're going to be digitizing IDs, we also need to do what our company did. We took cultural and tribal data and turned it into digital risk models. How do we know how to develop growth for a young person if you don't understand where they came from and where the rest of the economy is going, and create a curated space for that human being who is the pathway to the rest of the human beings? Considering how populated Africa is and will be, this is so important. You're right, technology often outstrips the legal aspects and the policy and regulations. We build those things to help model policy for African governments. I cannot thank you enough, and the pride I feel, Honorable Lawson, the fact that you guys have done this. It's not that difficult. There are plenty of young people with brilliant ideas who we should be approaching to build these things. Stop running off and going to get whoever it is from wherever to come and build things for us that have got nothing to do with our humanity. The digital process is the beginning of a psychological transfer to make Africans wealthy. And I'm just going to stop there.
Thanks very much, Viola. I guess this is where I remind people that this event is not under Chatham House rules, but is in fact entirely on the record. So we may have to cut the minister some slack in terms of her position. But I think you raised such an important point, Viola. So I will turn now. We have another question specifically for you, Minister, but I'll let you respond to Viola's really robust comment, and then we'll get the specific question from the floor. So, Minister, over to you. Yeah, you're muted. You're muted, Minister.
So I was saying thank you very much, Viola. One of the projects that we're very proud of is a Novici, it's the cash transfer project I was referring to. And this is 100% homegrown. And I would tell you that from entrepreneurs within the ministry. So I belong to, and we belong in Togo to a group of people. We think that we want to develop solutions on our own, and we need to own our own future, you know. So I don't think that it's, and if you don't mind me saying, I don't want to blame any country or anything. It's no longer the case. We're in 2021. We just need to do things on our own and be responsible. That's it. So there's no than ourselves from my perspective, you know, and we need to take responsibility for all the things that are wrong that are happening in our countries and that we're not dealing with. So in terms of digital transformation, our approach was that we don't want to wait for people to have birth certificates to give them a digital ID, because most of our people don't have birth certificates. So that's why it was so important to design a project with biometric ID, because we're going to take their biometric ID and the identity that they give us through, you know, they will come with two people who can testify on their behalf that this is who they say they are, and that is us. And that's the way we want to approach things, you know. We have to be creative. We have issues in Africa, and we have to be creative about these, you know, how to solve these issues. And nobody can really come and you know, I often say that we are the I want to say the gatekeeper. It's not the right word of the vision. Nobody is ever going to come and to your country and build it for you. Nobody's going to come and build a house for you. You building your own house, you work hard, you build your own house. And your vision, the way you look, the way you see your house, you have to own it so much that you're going to build it that way. And for a country, it's the same thing. So yes, when I talk with you, I absolutely am with you. I understand what you're saying, and I'm telling you, this is how things have to be. And this is what we're working towards. But it's difficult, it's a difficult process. And it's not Africa related. Most of the time, people want to take the easy way out. And that's where the challenge comes from. You know, building our own solutions requires a lot of leadership. It requires a lot of effort. And it requires a lot of Africans believing in themselves, you know? And it comes down to this as well, is that when I listen to all of you, I know that you believe in yourself. You believe you can do it. And I'm sure that around you, you give that kind of strength to whomever you meet, saying, oh, we are Africans, we can do it. So it takes a village. It takes people like you to make it happen. Optimistic about the future. You know, when I work with young people, I think they're super bright, you know, and most of the time they're the one driving us to do, you know, the most innovative things. So I'm very, very positive and very optimistic about the future. But you have to work hard, because there's no easy way out.
Thank you, Your Excellency. A robust answer to a robust question. Really appreciate it. Another one on Togo from my friend in Swaziland, Finele Chester, who's asking specifically, how has Togo benefited and grown its economy from digital transformation? I mean, do you have any concrete examples of real substantive change that has occurred as a result of digital transformation in your country?
Yes, for example, when the COVID, you know, pandemic hit us, there was this cash transfer program I mentioned earlier. We also designed loans for farmers, digital loans for farmers. And again, in terms of how people benefit from our digital transformation, is that these programs enable people to receive the funding directly with no intermediaries. And that's very powerful, you know, especially when you're far away, to know that you're going to receive your funding and that nobody will take a cut of whatever you're supposed to receive is very powerful. So we were able to design these particular platforms for farmers. One thing we also did is that we have digitized the entire COVID vaccine process. So people register through a USSD platform. You don't need to have an internet connection. You can also, there is an online platform and a USSD platform, and you register, you receive an SMS telling you which date and where to go to get vaccinated. And then once you have your second dose, because we're administering AstraZeneca vaccines right now, you will receive a QR code with a digital certificate that you got the vaccines. And this is also changing the way people approach things. First of all, a lot of young people were registering to the platform. We are one of the best performing country in terms of administering the COVID vaccines. And I think it's going to be beneficial to the entire country, because the quicker everybody gets vaccines and the quicker get a proof that they were vaccinated, the better it will be for the economy.
Thanks so much, Your Excellency. I mean, it is one of the issues we haven't spoken about in terms of, how Africa's digital progress has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that economic progress in general has been brutalized by the pandemic. And so digitalization would be interesting to talk about. But let me just move on to a specific question. And although you could probably answer this, Your Excellency, I'm going to shift it to Christine, because you are in Ghana. And it's Ijaton who's asking, e-commerce in West Africa, I've tried it in the past, but the reality is that the cost of transporting those things I buy in e-commerce is just prohibitively expensive. So I guess this is a question for beyond just digitization, but how do we address this transportation cost when we're, the ease of buying something, but at the end of the day, it's still going to cost a fortune if we've got to move it from Ghana even to Abidjan or something.
Yes, and I think, it goes back to when it comes to infrastructure challenges, we really need to get very creative before the infrastructure comes. And I think as African entrepreneurs, we're very resilient in that. I know, obviously, people have heard of Jumia Group as being one of the leading e-commerce platforms that has already tried to do cross-shipping across the border. Keep in mind, this is the first year of the AfTA agreement. So we do anticipate that, trade between borders across the African continent will change, maybe not radically overnight, but there are solutions in play in terms of infrastructure and companies who are already pioneering. I've heard of many, obviously, global startup ecosystem where sector. So we know about startups that are emerging that border-to-border locker rooms, similar to the Amazon model of having locker stays, because the biggest issue when it comes to transportation is not just the roads, it's really the address system in Africa. It's not easy to find locations. Sometimes if you give someone an address, you got to tell them, here's the landmark to find where the house is on a certain corner. So these are the multiple, everyone's laughing because everyone knows what I'm talking about, right? To really transport products across the African continent. So it's very important to really think about, again, going back to creativity, where entrepreneurs are already thinking of solutions ahead of time. Again, sometimes I remember my grandmother, who she was a really great cook, and she said, just because I don't have all the ingredients to cook the soup doesn't mean I'm not going to cook it. I'm hungry, I need to cook, right? So same thing with Africa, right? Where, we may not have the stove, right? But we're going to either borrow from someone or go back to basics and try to figure it out. So I think we need to have a really creative mindset around, until the infrastructure is in place, distributed evenly across the African continent, what are the creative solutions that other entrepreneurs and other governments are currently leveraging to move things forward? And again, going back to what's already in place right now with the AfTA agreement, companies like Jumia Group, we see a lot of transitions happening right now. And again, going back to the tech enablers, young people are already trying a lot of creative solutions. That's not just from Western markets, but other African continents. We need to look at example from, Honorable Minister, you're already leading the way on digital transformation at each other, right? Before looking at the global case studies, because a lot of times the African-based solutions are applicable across different countries on the continent.
Thanks, Christine. I know, Viola, I know you have to bounce, but in 20 seconds, can you give one sort of point of inspiration for young people who want to engage young Africans in terms of engaging in the digital transformation? Just give them one sort of perk up inspirational point about how they can get on this digital transformation. You're still muted.
Make sure your voice is heard. I would also encourage you to think global, not just Africa. Africa is becoming part of the global economy. That means that your opportunities are huge. They could be anything that you want. As long as you pay attention to how to monetize whatever digital engagement you are involved in, you will create wealth. You will succeed. You're African first, but you're also global. And I wish all of you the greatest success. This ain't your granddaddy's Africa. This is yours.
Thanks for the word of inspiration. You set a high standard. Torai, I'm going to turn to you. What about a word of inspiration?
Bye, friends.
Bye-bye, Viola. Wherever I've traveled, I've lived in Asia, I've lived in Europe, I'm in the United States right now. I found that people think of Africa as a country. Only the Africans don't see it that way. But if you think from a digitization and an opportunity perspective, the opportunity you have in Africa is actually the Africa that others see. So look at Africa as an entire market and look at Africa as an entire opportunity that's available. Frame it from a national perspective, a tribal perspective, and all that. But look at Africa as a huge opportunity that's available to you.
Thanks very much, Torai. I'm actually, before your word of inspiration, Your Excellency, I'm going to sneak in a question, if I may, that's just come in at the death from Alan. And it relates to that old bugbear of data. And everybody's collecting personal information about us, and they're collecting enormous amounts of data. But you know, for the everyday person, in terms of this stuff and their life is ruled by algorithms and the collection of data, I mean, how's the everyday person going to benefit? The everyday citizen in Togo, for instance, is benefit from all the information about them that is being collected by government and the private companies.
Let me give you the example of what we did in Togo. When we started the cash transfer program, we contacted the University of Berkeley and a team of researchers, part of the Innovation for Poverty Action. And we asked them to help us build an algorithm to determine the poorest areas in Togo. They did so using satellite imagery. Then they went further. They contacted telecom operators, and they, without even the implication of the government, they contacted telecom operators, and they collected some metadata in order to design an algorithm that would help them determine who the poorest people in Togo were. And so, yes, everybody, and I'm the first one super annoyed to have companies collecting my data, and I'm not talking about companies, but I also know that in specific instances, such as these ones, it's extremely helpful if you want to make sure that you're supporting those who really need it to be supported. Otherwise, you can spend a lot of money and actually, you know, waste this money. So the use of data today provides an opportunity, for example, in social protection. And so that's also something that we need to really pay attention to, is that in Africa, we have a unique opportunity to design things the proper way from day one, because nothing is here in some areas, and not that, and so let's just try to not do things the traditional way, but let's just take risks. And so when you take risk and you use technology, the outcome can be really outstanding.
Wow. I think, Minister, Your Excellency, that comprises a word of inspiration for me. Thank you so much. I'm going to give the last word on words of inspiration for young Africans to Christine, and then we'll close it out.
Yeah, I guess I'll close by saying, for my young people across the African continent, we're what Africa's been waiting for. The solution is not going to come from the outside, it's from us. We know our problems, so we're going to build the right solutions. And I need to remind people to be confident of that, because now the future billionaires are the one creating solutions for Africa, not for Silicon Valley, not for New York, not from London, not for Europe, for our own problems. So look at the problems of Africa as opportunities for you to build the Africa that you want it to be. And that's the last thing I'll say, that we are the solutions. We are the Africa that we've been waiting for. I'm so proud to be a part of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, everyone. I don't think this session is beatable by any of the others, but I really look forward to watching this again on YouTube, I think, but it's when it appears in a couple weeks. But thanks, everyone, for your time. It has been an education and an inspiration, and hope to see everyone physically soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.